A special pill allows him to unlock the full potential of his brain, turning him into a genius at everything. The story starts with Eddie Mora, a messy, jobless writer who talks more than he takes action. He's struggling to write a book and experiencing writer's block. During lunch with his girlfriend Lindy, she returns his keys and ends their relationship, frustrated with his lack of progress while she's been promoted to an editor. Feeling down, Eddie walks along a street in New York and unexpectedly runs into his former brother-in-law Vernon, whom he hasn't seen in 9 years. Vernon is friendly and invites Eddie for a drink. Eddie admits he's falling behind on his book. Currently working as a consultant for a pharmaceutical company, Vernon offers Eddie a new brain-enhancing drug that will be released on the market next year. Vernon has to leave but gives Eddie his business card. On his way home, Eddie takes the see-through pill. While in the stairwell, Eddie encounters the landlord's wife, who berates him for being late on rent and lacking a successful career. As the drug starts to take effect, Eddie's perception sharpens, and he begins conversing confidently with the woman about legal studies. Soon after, they collaborate on her law school paper and engage in a sexual encounter. In his untidy apartment, Eddie notices the mess and promptly cleans it up. Then he sits down at his laptop and starts writing fervently. The following morning, he returns to his usual state, but he has printed out several hundred pages of his book. He takes them to his editor, who examines them cautiously. Back at his apartment, Eddie checks his voicemail and discovers that the editor is eager to discuss the work. She has read 40 pages and is impressed. Eddie goes to see his friend Vernon, who has a bloody face but refuses to disclose what happened. However, Vernon reveals that he's using a drug called NZT48 and asks Eddie to run errands for him, including picking up his dry cleaning and getting some food. When Eddie returns, he finds the door slightly open, and upon entering, he discovers Vernon's lifeless body on the couch and the apartment in disarray. Shocked and frightened, Eddie composes himself and calls 911. While waiting for the police to arrive, he searches for the stash of NZT48 and finds a plastic bag filled with the pills inside the oven, along with a bundle of cash and an address book. He hides these things from the police, who eventually let him go after a brief interview. While at the police station, he has a phone call with Melissa, his ex-wife, who refuses to see him. When he returns home, he takes another pill and gets a haircut, new clothes, and the motivation to complete his book within 4 days. He learns to play the piano, card tricks, exercises, new languages, and acts like a know-it-all to impress new friends. One of his listeners, Kevin Doyle, a stockbroker, gives him his business card. Eddie is invited to an exclusive beach party attended by wealthy individuals. He impresses everyone by driving a Maserati. He even showcases his bravery by diving off a cliff from a height of over 100 feet, revealing that NZT makes him fearless. During this time, he has a realization about his life's purpose, but understands that he needs a substantial amount of money to achieve it. He starts day trading slowly, but he needs more money quickly. A cafe owner introduces him to a Russian loan shark named Gennady. Gennady gives him $100,000, but threatens him with severe harm if he fails to repay it. Eddie becomes serious about stock trading and quickly grows his brokerage account to $2 million. He receives job offers and attention from reporters. Kevin Doyle arranges a meeting with successful entrepreneur Carl Van Loon. During dinner, Lindy is impressed with the new Eddie, and they reconnect. Eddie's picture appears in the newspaper as a mystery trader. A suspicious man in a tan coat seems to be observing them. At night, Eddie feels nervous and senses that something is not right. Eddie meets a corporate investor named Carl Van Loon at a restaurant. Eddie playfully mentions medication as his secret, and then proceeds to share his understanding of mass psychology and hints at a formula related to it. To gauge Eddie's abilities, Carl tests him by asking him to evaluate a file containing information about various companies. Eddie realizes that a significant merger is being planned. Carl drops off Eddie in Chinatown and invites him to another meeting the following day. While walking, Eddie loses track of time due to a side effect of the drug NZT. In the midst of various disconnected events, he remembers Bruce Lee movies which inspire him to confront a group of muggers in a subway station. Later, he enters a bar where he makes new acquaintances and has a sexual encounter with a blonde woman. After 18 hours, he returns to his normal state, but has no recollection of what happened during that time. His supply of NZT48 is almost finished, and he struggles to understand the corporate files anymore. Despite wanting to cancel his meeting with Carl, Kevin convinces him to attend. Carl asks Eddie about Hank Atwood, a competitor who unexpectedly rose to success 2 years ago. However, while watching TV, Eddie sees a news report about the murder of a blonde woman at a hotel the day before. Overwhelmed with worry, he leaves the room and vomits outside, concerned that he may have been responsible for the girl's death during his blackout. Afraid of the negative effects of NZT, Eddie wants to learn more about Vernon's other customers, but has no luck contacting them. Either they have died or ended up in the hospital. By chance, Eddie's next call reaches the phone of the intimidating man in the tan coat sitting across the park. Eddie quickly realizes the connection and manages to escape. He runs into his former wife Melissa at a cafe. Melissa, who is currently struggling with drug addiction, confesses that she used to take NZT like him, but stopped when she realized the negative consequences of operating at such an intense mental level. She learned from Vernon that other NZT users had died. It's been 2 years since she quit, but now she can't focus for more than 10 minutes, and her life is in chaos. Melissa advises him to gradually reduce his NZT intake, instead of quitting abruptly, as going cold turkey can be lethal. She then leaves. Russian loan shark Gennady tracks down Eddie and demands repayment. While confronting Eddie, Gennady notices a dropped NZT pill and takes it. Eddie returns Gennady's $100K and lets him go. Eddie, who is sick and disheveled, goes to Lindy's office and confesses everything, including his dependence on the drugs and the fact that he hid his main stash in her house. She retrieves the plastic bag herself. However, on her way back in a taxi, she is attacked by the man in the tan coat from the park. He brutally kills 2 innocent people who try to help her as she flees and hides in Central Park. Lindy contacts Eddie, who encourages her to take one of the pills. Under the pill's influence, Lindy manages to escape by using an ice skating girl as a weapon, injuring the face of the man in the tan coat. Eddie and Lindy have a sexual encounter, but the next morning Lindy feels serious and distant. She no longer wants any involvement with NZT. Eddie insists that he requires more time with it to make necessary arrangements. As a result, Lindy decides to leave. Gennady and Eddie meet again, and this time Gennady asks for more pills. Concerned about his safety, Eddie hires 2 bodyguards. He encounters Carl, who appears confident and composed, and assigns him the important task of facilitating the biggest corporate acquisition ever. Eddie has learned the right amount of pills to take, making sure to eat well and avoid alcohol to prevent memory lapses. He arranges for a custom suit with hidden compartments to conceal his pills and recruits a chemist to recreate the NZT pills within a brief period of 6 months. During a business lunch at a restaurant, he notices a police detective who was involved in investigating Vernon's death. Observing him, the detective shows Eddie a newspaper photo of himself at the hotel where the blonde woman was murdered. Eddie decides to hire a highly skilled lawyer named Morris Brandt, who manages to prove his innocence despite weak evidence against him. Meanwhile, the merger progresses and is getting closer to completion. Eddie expresses his intention to move forward, but Carl wants him to stay, recognizing Eddie's natural talent, which he flaunts like someone born into wealth, while also pointing out that Eddie hasn't earned his place through competitive experience to properly assess his competitors. After discovering his hotel room had been ransacked, Eddie decides to purchase a highly secure condominium worth $8.5 million as a protective haven. While out on the street, he encounters the Russian once more, who demands 20 pills or threatens consequences. Eddie remains optimistic that he'll be able to handle Gennady, as he is expecting a substantial sum of $40 million from the Atwood merger. At the office, Hank Atwood doesn't show up. Carl and Eddie meet Hank Atwood's wife, who informs them that Hank is in the hospital. The deal will be finalized once he recovers. While walking on the street, Eddie notices Mrs. Atwood's limo driver, who has visible scars and is wearing a tan coat. In the meantime, Eddie needs to go to the police station and participate in an identification lineup. Fortunately, his lawyer, Morris Brandt, manages to get him released. At the office, Carl is very upset. Atwood is in a coma, and Carl wants to find out where Eddie has been. He believes Eddie has information about the situation and suspects Eddie of betraying him. In the washroom, Eddie realizes that his pills have been stolen. Then a package arrives with Eddie's name on it. Inside the box, he finds the hands of his 2 bodyguards. In the condo, Eddie is watching TV when he spots Mrs. Atwood and his lawyer, Morris Brandt. He realizes that they are the ones who took his hidden pills. Suddenly, he sees the Russians approaching through the security cameras, trying to break in with a chainsaw. Faced with the prospect of their painful torture, Eddie goes to the balcony, contemplating suicide. However, he remembers one last NZT pill and tries to find it, but loses it when the Russians enter. Gennady injects himself with his final pill and starts preparing to torture Eddie. In a desperate move, Eddie manages to overpower Gennady and kill him. The other 2 Russian thugs, who were busy cracking Eddie's safe, return to the room. Eddie, fueled by the NZT in Gennady's blood, fights them off, blinding one and eventually killing both in self-defense. Hank Atwood passes away at the hospital. Eddie realizes that Brandt took his pills, but didn't give them to Mr. Atwood. In the waiting room, Eddie encounters the man wearing a tan coat. With his boss gone, The tan coat man helps Eddie search Brant's safe. They discover Eddie's pill packet while the tan coat man keeps an eye on Brant, who is tied up and silenced on the floor. 1 year later, Eddie's book is published, and he's running for the U.S. Senate representing New York. Unexpectedly, Carl pays him a visit at his campaign office. Initially friendly, Carl implies that he knows Eddie's secret and has shut down his NZT laboratory. In exchange for future insider information, Carl offers Eddie an unlimited supply of NZT. Eddie responds assertively, showcasing his enhanced abilities and declaring that he no longer relies on NZT, as he has achieved permanent enhancement. He pushes Carl away. Later, Eddie and Lindy reunite at an upscale Chinese restaurant. Eddie impresses her by ordering in fluent Chinese, but he notices Lindy's puzzled expression. Curiously, he asks, "What's wrong?" pretending to be modest. That's it, guys. If you want to see how this guy's day resets every time he dies or how this evil mummy comes back to life after 5,000 years, then watch this next. And please don't forget to subscribe.